The following program is a production of UNC-TV and the North Carolina Arboretum.
Funding for this program is made possible in part by UNC-TV members.
The special relationship between humans and nature has always inspired us. We have celebrated and expressed our experience of the natural world in sculpture and dance, music and verse, throughout the ages. Bonsai is another vehicle for this expression. In bonsai, we express our experience of nature using living nature itself in the form of plants. Through an intimate exchange between the plant and the person who grows the plant, a unique individual creation emerges. It is a subtle blending of horticulture and art, human and plant. The world of bonsai is miniature. The natural world that it evokes is boundless. Bonsai is the living art that expresses in miniature an experience of nature. Bonsai is nature reflected. Hello, I'm Arthur Joura, bonsai curator at the North Carolina Arboretum here in beautiful Asheville, North Carolina. Hundreds of thousands of people come to the Arboretum every year, and for many of them, it's their first opportunity to see live bonsai. And they're amazed. They're filled with questions. One of the first questions that they ask is, can you make bonsai out of anything? They see that we have a wide variety of plant material on display. And for many people, this is a surprise. They seem to think that a bonsai is a certain kind of plant. You put a seed in a pot, you water it, it grows into a bonsai tree. There's a lot more to it than that. The answer to the question, can anything be used for a bonsai, is yes, almost. You can try anything, but some things will work better than others do. One of the best subjects for bonsai and most popular subjects are maple trees. It doesn't matter if it's a Japanese maple or our own native red maple, or in this case, a Trident Maple. They all respond well to bonsai culture. This is how we select the plants that will work best for bonsai use. One of the main concerns is, can it take pruning? Because part of the shaping technique, part of what gets us to this form of presentation is constant pruning. A plant must be able to take pruning in order to be a bonsai. We're also interested to know how well it will grow in a container, because all bonsai are grown in pots. Some plants take better to container culture than others, so that's an important thing to know. A part of that is that we prune the roots as well as the tops. Certain plants don't like having their roots pruned, so we look for that. There are many other subjects that worked well for bonsai, and one of them is elm. This Chinese elm, which is a variety called Seinu, has very, very tiny leaves. And for a lot of people, that's a very desirable thing, the tiny leaves. They look at it as being a scale issue. If you have a small tree, having big leaves is disagreeable to some people. So they look for these plants that already have smaller leaves. Now in bonsai culture, over time, a big leaf will gradually diminish in size. But if you start out with a small leaf to begin with, you're going to get to the tiniest leaf possible quicker. Both of those trees that I showed you are Asian species, and a lot of people think that you have to work with an Asian plant, but you don't. This is not an Asian species. This is a native plant, grows in the forest right around here. It's American Hornbeam, and this is one that we've been training now for about 10 years. You'll notice the leaf is bigger than that of the elm, but it's not a disagreeable thing. These leaves have shrunken, and they'll shrink more as the plant continues to be developed as a bonsai. There are other options too. If you like the look of a coniferous plant, you may go for a juniper. Junipers are very, very popular for bonsai use. They take the pruning well, they grow well in containers, they can take lots of sunlight, they tolerate a little drying out if you forget to water them one day. So they're a good plant for people to begin with. For more experienced people, they might want to try something like a pine tree, which has a very classic look, but they're a little bit more demanding in their culture. It takes a little bit more to grow one of these than to grow the maple or the elm. Well, after you've seen what the possibilities are, the next question is usually, how do I start? Well, you start here. Now, agreeing it's a long way from this to this, but you can start with seedlings and cuttings, and here we have a birch tree, here we have a maple. The birch was collected as a seedling that was growing in the forest, had a few years on it. We make a few cuts, we start building movement into the trunk. This one was grown as a seed. It's a red maple, and this is only its second year of growth. It began last year. You'll see it's straight, but the trunk is young and soft. We can take a piece of wire, this is just aluminum wire, and carefully wrap it around the stem of the tree. Very careful, because this is an easy thing to damage when it's so young and soft. But because of that malleability, we can affect the shape of it now with this wire. We can put a bend in it like so, and now we let it grow. The wire can't stay on there forever because it'll bite in, but after we take the wire off, the trunk will stay like that. Of course, there's a lot more to it. There's many steps, and we go through an entire process to reach the finished product. We've moved outside now. We're in the nursery area. This is where all the serious growing of the plants takes place. I've brought our seedling maple out, and as it happens, we're standing right in front of a larger maple. It's not the exact same kind. This is a red maple and this is a chalk maple, but maples tend to grow in a very similar way, so it makes a good comparison. Now, we started here with this plant. We also started the exact same way with this plant. How did we get from this point to this point? There's a process involved, and one of the first decisions that we have to make is whether we're intending to grow a larger plant like this, or whether we want to grow a smaller plant like this. In this case, you see the height of this plant is already equal with this one. And so if we were intending to make a plant of this size, we would not be growing this any taller than it already is. Instead, we would start working on branching right away. We may even at this point put it into a shallow bonsai pot like this and begin training it right from the start. However, if our intention is to have a larger plant, we have to grow this plant on. And if we were to keep it small like this and only allow it to grow in very small increments, it would take a long, long time to reach this stage. Instead, what we do is we provide ample room for this plant to grow. And by giving it the room to grow and promoting rapid growth, then we can build this trunk much quicker. We can get to that bigger size much quicker. The way this plant was handled, it was put into this large box. Now, these boxes were constructed specifically for this purpose, to train bonsai plants. It allows for a lot of root growth room, which is important for promoting strong growth. At the same time, it keeps the root mat shallow. Remember, when we eventually plant it in a bonsai pot, the bonsai pots always have a shallow profile. There's no use in promoting deep roots like you get in a standard nursery pot. So these boxes allow for lots of root growth, but do not promote deep rootage that we can't use. Now, as the plant is growing, all the while we're growing it, cutting it back, growing it, cutting it back. If you were to look closely at this plant, you would see numerous places along the trunk, scars where cuts were made. The plant was grown, it was cut back, it was grown again. Each time that we do that, it changes the direction of the trunk. That's how we make that trunk movement. And it also builds taper into the trunk. And so we have an idea in mind, at least that much of an idea. We say we want to grow a larger plant, and so we promote that growth. Meanwhile, we're also thinking about what will be the eventual design of this plant. Is it going to be a formal upright or an informal upright? So all the way, we're trying to figure that out and work with what the plant provides us. That's a key thing. We can't just impose our will on the plant. It's a symbiotic relationship. The plant grows, it produces certain things, and then we use the things that the plant provides to build the final design. It may be that you have one idea and the plant doesn't cooperate. You have to change your idea. Or it may be that the plant is cooperating, but then something goes wrong. Maybe this branch will break tomorrow. Then I have to come up with a new idea. This is a challenging aspect of it, but it's a lot of fun too. Keeps you on your toes. Now, in order for the plant to withstand this kind of treatment, that is the constant pruning, the constant taking away, we have to have a healthy plant. That's the first and foremost thing in bonsai. Your plants must be healthy. You have to have the horticultural ability to grow a healthy plant. Then when you do that pruning, instead of hurting the plant, it promotes more growth. The healthy plants can withstand the treatment and provide more growth, which gives you more opportunities for designing your plant. This one, as it turns out, is the exact same plant as this. These are both Viburnum casinoides. It's a native plant that grows in the forests around here. In the case of this plant, we've decided we want a larger scale bonsai, so we're letting it grow. These actually started from seed at the same time. 1998, these seeds were started, and this plant was allowed to grow. This plant was kept small right from the beginning. So you have to have an idea that way. And this is part of the challenge and enjoyment of doing bonsai, is you have an idea, the plant may have another idea. The two of you have to meet somewhere and cooperate to get to the finished product. Let's come in here now and have a look at the growing bed area of the nursery. We have a wide variety of plants growing here, including a few that we intend to use for bonsai. What we have here is a very young plant. This is a spice bush. And this one is only a couple years from seed. And in order to produce any kind of trunk on here in less than 10 or 20 years, we put it in the ground and let it grow abundantly. And that will speed up the development of that trunk and get us to a place where we can begin shaping the tree. This is a different case. This is a European hornbeam, and this actually has been worked on as a bonsai for about 8 years or so. And you can see it has a nice branch structure. The trunk has nice movement. The trouble is that the trunk has no caliper at all. It's very, very thin still, and it has no taper. It's about the same size here as it is up here. And in bonsai, what we'd really like to see is a dramatic taper, the widest part being the base, the narrowest part being up the top. Plus, to give the impression of an old tree, more trunk size is useful. So this, although it already has this work done, and it's going to probably lose this branch structure by being in the ground, I still feel it's worth doing it because I want a bigger trunk on the tree. What'll happen, these will grow out, they'll get kind of rank looking, and in the end they'll probably have to be taken off and we'll have to build a new branch structure. But in the meantime, all that growth will be fattening up the trunk of the tree. If you want to know what this one will look like after a few years, we can look at some of these others that are here in the ground. This English oak, for example, has been in the ground for a year. There is a bonsai-like trunk under there, but there's lots of foliage now. And back here we have a red maple that's been in the ground a little bit longer, and you see it looks actually like a shrub. It's just this full mass of green, but down there underneath that you have the beginnings of a really big trunk. Then the job will be to take it out of the ground, reintroduce it to container culture, and begin working on that branch structure and refining it. It's a process. This is just to build one certain part of the tree, and then we have to move on to the next stage of development. Now, we've already looked at how to begin a bonsai from a very early stage. You may choose to speed up the process a little bit by beginning with a plant that already has some age built into it. These are boxwoods from a local nursery. Like most of the plants that you're going to see at garden centers and nurseries, these are actually being sold for landscape use. They haven't been worked on or pre-developed for bonsai use. So you have to be careful when you're shopping, just like you do with any other product. We're looking for certain things if we're scouting for bonsai candidates. When I see something like this, here we actually have two plants that grew up together. They're pressed right next to each other. That's okay in the landscape, it's not a problem. But if I tried to make this into a bonsai, I'd have to split those two apart. And when I did, what I'd find is I had two plants that were each lacking a side. I'd have two half plants. So I would not choose this one for bonsai use. Then I look at this one. These are all nice, healthy plants. That's the first thing that you look for when you go to the nursery, is to get yourself something that doesn't have bugs, something that looks nice and healthy, as these do. Now I look in here, oh, this has a nice trunk, and it has a nice base with some roots to show off. Unfortunately, it has a big swelling right here, where lots of branches are coming out. Now I'm going to prune some of those branches off, and when I do, I'm going to have this big, ugly swelling right in the middle of my trunk, which is not a nice thing to look at. So I don't think I would choose this one for bonsai use either. Which leaves us with this candidate. It's helpful to take these things out of the pot so that you can see the base of the tree, although your local nurseryman might not appreciate that. We look here, and we have two trunks, but these are not pressed together. These are spread apart. I can make a tree that has two parts. I look, it has good branching in all directions. I think this tree has a lot of pluses for bonsai. I'll have to remove a lot of these branches, but I think it'll be okay. The root system looks good. Of course, it hasn't been pre-trained, so we're going to have to do a lot of work on this plant. But this is the one that we'll want to use to make into a new bonsai. So now we've selected the subject for our demonstration. I want to keep this demonstration as simple as possible, with the idea that this is something that you can do without running out and buying a lot of fancy equipment. You get a plant from the nursery that you think has some good potential, and then you get yourself a few tools. We don't need a whole lot. We need a couple of pairs of scissors. One we'll use for cutting the foliage, and it's good if it has a bit of a sharp point to it for reaching in. The other one should be an older, cheaper pair. Still needs to have an edge, but this we'll use for cutting roots, cutting in the root ball. So this will most likely get chewed up a little bit. So we need two. Then these are ordinary garden pruners, and we would use these for cutting any limbs that might be too big for this pair of scissors. So this will do the light work, this will do the heavy work in terms of cutting. We also need a stick. It's just a plain flat stick that's been sharpened to a point on one end, and that will be a useful tool also when we're working with the roots. I have here some wire. This is just aluminum wire. It's been coated to make it look like copper. It doesn't need to be coated. If you have some different gauges of wire, that's useful. Also, today we won't go into a bonsai container. The bonsai containers are quite shallow, and to go from something this size into that small a pot might not be so good for the tree all at once. So we'll look at stepping it down into this more shallow plastic mum pan. Those are the things that we need, and now we look at the plant, and we're thinking of it in terms of design. It has a very agreeable look now, all full of foliage, but it looks like a shrub. It doesn't look like a tree. Our job is to turn it into a tree. So we start looking at it from different perspectives, and what we're looking for is the most agreeable view of this plant. And I'm looking for branching I can use. I'm thinking about what style the tree or what form the tree will take, and I think both of these are usable. So we'll look at a twin trunk or a two trunk tree. This will be the dominant one, so I'm going to look for a line from the base all the way up to the top. This will be the subordinate or secondary tree, and it will have its own line going from base up to the top. It'll be shorter than the main tree. I'm also going to think in terms of branching. I have to thin a lot of this out. A lot of this is going to go away. The plant is actually going to look a lot more thinned out, bare, not as good as it looks right now. By the time we're done, it's going to look quite different. But we'll have a structure built into it, and then when the foliage comes back, it'll make a very, very agreeable looking tree. So I pick up my scissors and I start to think in terms of things that I know automatically I don't need. I think this is going to be my front. I like this view of the plant right here. It allows me to see this trunk and this trunk as separate, and it also gives me branching in places that I think I'll need it. I'm going to go ahead and start snipping things that I feel very certain I don't need. And a lot of these lower branches are things that I know are not going to be in my final design. You can see with just a few snips, things start to open up a little bit. We can see the plant better. We have a better view of what there is to work with. Now I've got two branches back here that are quite heavy, and they're carrying a lot of leaves, so if I take them away, there'll be a big empty spot there. But one of the things that we look at when we're creating the image of a tree is we want to have a trunk. We don't necessarily want a lot of branching coming down low, so I'm afraid these two will have to be removed. I take my pruners, because we need a heavier tool. The scissors won't cut this. And I get in there, let me thin out things a little bit so I can see and make a better finished cut. Okay. Now I can see better what I'm doing. I need to get in closer. I don't want to leave those stobs sticking out like that. So I get in close and I try to make a nice clean cut. Okay. Now I look again at it from the front. It's beginning to look more tree-like already. Less like a shrub, more like a tree. That's the idea that we're aiming for, and we continue with that same process as we move along throughout the tree. Well, I've been trimming on this plant for about 15 minutes now, 15 or 20 minutes. And as you can see, we've taken a whole lot away from it. Too much, most of you think, too much. Very few people would look at this plant now, see all this gone, and feel like it looks better. But the idea, again, is that we're setting up the structure. All these leaves, they'll come back. The plant will fill out again. But this time, instead of having a random structure where all you see is foliage, you'll have an organized structure, a network of branching, and you'll see the foliage and you'll see branching as well. So we're going to move now into the part where we trim the roots. We have to pick apart this root ball. This stick is very useful for that. We start pulling down some of the soil like this, trying to lower that level in hopes that we'll see some nice big roots up on top here. This one is actually, I mean, it's a nice big root, but it's not in a good place. We don't want it covering over the main tree. You know, it's the main tree, so it has the upper hand in all respects. So we take away those roots, and now I'm going to pick this down like so. I think this back one here has to go as well. And we'll continue to do this, working the soil away from the roots. Well, we've spent about 15 or 20 more minutes thinning out the root mass, using this stick to pull the roots apart, using my scissors to trim. Sometimes I had to use the heavy clippers to get at some heavier roots, but now I've got a nice flat pad and I've got mostly fine roots. Now I'm going to take my pot, which I've put some wires into. I've just run them through the drainage holes, and I'm going to take a scoop of soil, potting mix that we use, and I'm going to put that down in the bottom of the container. We'll settle our plant in there, make sure it makes good contact, and then we'll use these wires to strap the plant in to make sure that it's secure. And here's the finished product from today's workshop. We have the plant potted securely in the pot now. We've got wires spreading some of the branches out. We took a lot of top away. We took a lot of root away. We left enough leaves to feed the plant. We left enough root to supply the leaves with moisture. It's a long way from this beginning to the point where it'll look like a real bonsai, but it can happen. This is the exact same kind of plant. And it probably started its bonsai career in the same fashion, maybe 20 or 30 years ago. It takes a while, it takes patience, it takes persistence, but you can get from here to here.
Funding for this program is made possible in part by UNC-TV members.